So, Mr. Brendan Schaub, first of all, I'm a big fan. I'm not here to shit all over you unless you're into that, in which case, we'll sort something out. You know what I'm saying? But what I want to say is, your Big Brown Breakdown podcast should end, bro. You've got so much on your plate. You aren't watching the fights. The Big Brown Breakdown takes place, and about 10 minutes of the hour and a half episodes are about UFC and MMA in general. And that can't run on an MMA podcast, first of all. I'm not here firing shots. End the podcast. There's no need, bro. There's no need for you to have it. Do what you did with Luke Thomas. You just posted a video of Luke Thomas. Phenomenal, Brendan. Phenomenal video. Luke Thomas is great. You were there to bounce off him, add some humour to it. That's great. Do that and more about the cards. You need a tag team partner, bro. Okay? Because right now, it really came into effect after the Uruguay card. It shows you don't have the time to watch these fights. You know what I'm saying? You just don't have the time. And I get it. You're trying to do your stand-up comedy. You're trying to get better at stand-up comedy. You're trying to do this. You've got this podcast. You've got this. You've got this requirement. You've got a kid. You've got a wife or a girlfriend. Whatever's going on. You know what I'm saying? You've got too much responsibility to have an MMA podcast where 10 minutes of the hour and a half episode is you talking about MMA and you haven't even watched the fights. It can't happen. Do your breakdown with Luke Thomas and do it for every big card. I get it. Some UFC on the ESPN Plus cards, don't even bother. If they're shit, don't give them the respect of a breakdown. Okay? Do what you did with Luke Thomas that came out recently, where you broke down the UFC 241 card, and do that for big events with big names and for big pay-per-view events as well, or any pay-per-view event. That's a perfect combo. You and Luke Thomas are great together. Do that! Don't do an MMA podcast. And I swear to God, I don't think you're reading the comments here. Bro, I think people are kind of done. The MMA podcast, we watch, if we want to hear about your lifestyle, we go to TFATK. We want to hear about this, you just having a laugh and having a massive joke around, we go to King and a Sting. You know what I'm saying? When we come to an MMA podcast, Big Brown Breakdown, the Fight Breakdown show, we don't want to be scrolling to the comments every single video you post of it and seeing, 30 minutes in, he talks about fighting for 10 minutes. You're welcome, guys. Just post the 10 minutes if you want. We don't need to hear the whole thing, the whole shebang. You know what I'm saying? Do what you did with Luke Thomas. That's a great idea. Do the fucking food truck diaries. I'll say this. You don't have enough time and you haven't watched enough fights and you're not in the fight world enough right now to talk about MMA for an hours long podcast. And that makes sense. Without a guy to bounce off of, that's a very difficult thing to do. I only do 2 hours because I have fucking people talking about dicks and which girl would you fuck and giving me ideas in my chat the entire time. And I can't even imagine how talking on your own with just Chin to talk to. No offense, Chin, but, he doesn't really add much in terms of MMA knowledge about things. You know what I'm saying? So just scrap the Big Brown Breakdown. Go straight with Luke Thomas. There you've got 2 guys. You can make 40-minute episodes like you did last time with him. It was a great episode. Break down the card. Talk about boxing a little bit. Talk about this on the side. But it needs to be MMA focused if you're selling the product as an MMA focused thing. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like MMA the Big Brown Breakdowns come to an end. Do the food truck diaries. They're so good. Cut out the MMA Big Brown Breakdown. Cut it out. Don't do your podcast on the Below the Belt. Okay? Not because I don't want you to. It's a good podcast. You know what I'm saying? When you do talk about fighting, usually, it's good stuff to hear you say. It's entertaining to listen to. You make jokes. It's somewhat entertaining. But don't do that and make time for other stuff on your channel like the meetings with Luke Thomas, the way you're going to break down the whole event and really talk MMA. You know what I'm saying? Not talk about, hey, I was eating this carrot the other day. Whoa, that's a 20-minute story out of nowhere. Hey, I was walking my son to the park the other day and he tripped over. No, we want to hear about MMA. You know what I'm saying? That's what we go to TFATK for. That's what we go to King and the Sting for. This is an MMA podcast, Brendan. Gotta have some standards. Cut it out and make more time for Food Truck Diaries, for your stuff with Luke Thomas, but mainly Food Truck Diaries, because I tell you that Colby Covington one, they all get hundreds of thousands of views, regardless of the guest. You can give so much back into the MMA community by having a different guest on more often than you do now. Maybe instead of once a week, you do it twice a week instead of that hour-long podcast. Surely it's more worth it. You know what I'm saying? It's good stuff. Get some sponsors. If you do it that often, you're going to get more sponsors and shit like that. You do so much stuff better than you do the MMA podcast that I feel like it's holding you back at this point in your career. And that can't be happening. You know what I'm saying? You've got too much on your plate. You're doing too much to have to watch every MMA card start to finish. I get why people are hating on it. I get why you can't talk MMA for an hour and a half. It's an unrealistic expectation if you don't have time to watch the fights on the weekend because you're selling out shows and you've got all this other stuff on your plate and you've got to look after this and you've got to do that and you've got to do this podcast. There's only so much you can do. So scrap that fucking podcast, bro. Before it goes too long and people are just going to fall off naturally from your channel. That's what you don't want. They can fall off that one podcast. Don't let them fall off of your channel by stretching it out too long. Whack! Cut off the podcast. Done. Do another Food Truck Diaries. Do more episodes with Luke Thomas where you break down events. That's a great thing, bro. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Come on, Brendan. You know what I'm saying? All it takes is one time to scroll through the comments of your MMA podcast to realise what the message from the audience is. You know what I'm saying? Every time you look at a video, surely you can see, if you look at the comments even once, Chin, you're kind of responsible as well because you're the producer of this. You should know what's going on in his channel. Is no one around Brendan telling him what the comments are on his channel? Every single MMA podcast, there is a comment right at the top. Boom! Most liked comment ever on that video. 30 minutes, skip to MMA talk. MMA talk ends at 40 minutes. That's all people are there for, man. Scrap it. Like and subscribe. See you later. And yeah, even though I just shit on you a little bit, just like, you know, bring me on the show, because, you know, it's rough. Bring me on the show. Even if you're going to do the MMA podcast, only do another episode of the MMA podcast if I'm on it. You know what I'm saying? That's the only way I'll allow it. See you later.